Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Wednesday. Good topic on hand for you. We're going to open up the phone lines and let you jump into the conversation because we're going to be talking with a lawyer, but not about the Vanderbilt rape case today. We're going to be talking about malpractice cases and how you know whether or not you've been wronged by a doctor or a hospital if you have a case or the like. And aside from just going into the details of that, and we'll always kind of, set that for you, it's also very interesting to talk to my guest this morning just about some of the culture of what goes on in hospitals, and he sees it because he's handled these cases, and sometimes what can produce situations, carelessness, neglect, whatever, that leads to these lawsuits. One thing we were just talking about before we took the air, assembly line medicine. You just don't like hearing about that, especially if you're one of the patients. Anyway, joining us this morning is malpractice attorney here in town, Clint Kelly. Good morning to you, sir.
Thank you, Nick.
I mean, it is interesting. You're someone in a position that can really speak to this from, I think a point of view that many of us don't have. You have a lot of these clients, you do a lot of research. It's your job to know how things are done in hospitals and how doctors operate. And when we talked about very obvious cases, let's say you're going in to have, this case you were telling me about, a woman to have her ovary removed.
Right.
They took the wrong one out.
Right.
How does that happen?
The patient was not marked before the procedure.
Marked. I mean, they're supposed to put a big felt tip marker on your back. Boom, boom, it's this ovary on the right side.
That's right. They'll write maybe left on the left arm or right on the right arm, and they'll put an X on there, which is a safety measure, sort of like a pilot's checklist to make sure the surgeon knows exactly where he's going to work or she's going to work before the procedure. And in this case, this fail-safe didn't work. And I believe to some extent medicine has become a victim of its own efficiencies because now they can do so many procedures so quickly and so well that they stack up a lot of these procedures one after the other, and in order to get them done, sometimes, unfortunately, rules are broken or safety mechanisms are not followed and someone gets hurt.
You hear about doctors who are in residency or to-be doctors that are still getting their education, and the residency and the crazy hours and the working and how long they stay up, and it's nuts when you're in residency. Now, do you ever have cases where you look at how long an individual doctor had been doing this in a row? Are there supposed to be limits? You say there's an assembly line. Let's say you have, 20 tonsillectomies to do in a row or something like that, and it takes all day. Is there a point where a doctor's supposed to say, I'm supposed to take a break, I need to get lunch, I need to cut it off here, and where you've seen that they've gone way overboard, and it's obvious why that very last one, that person screwed it up because he was exhausted?
I've had a few cases where fatigue has been a factor. Now, it's difficult to get an expert to say that the physician who's alleged to have been at fault is simply working too long or too hard. And doctors are very good at being able to accomplish tasks even when they are to some extent fatigued. So it's a hard thing to prove, Nick, but you just know it. You know it when they're working a 24-hour shift. And particularly when you're at the end of a shift or on a weekend when something bad happens, you can usually put two and two together and figure out that it's oftentimes fatigue played a factor.
And it's one thing too, a doctor comes in and doesn't see maybe a mark on an individual and has been told just screw the right ovary. Now sometimes too, the mark may be by a mistake by the nurse, misreading the chart or forgetting marks the wrong side. Is it both scenarios?
Yes, and everyone has to rely on the other. They have fail-safe mechanisms, just like NASA has backups, so does medicine. And so, the physician's supposed to know where he's going to operate. The nurse is supposed to know where the operation is going to take place. The body's supposed to be marked properly to remind people to make sure they know where to operate. And so all of those systems are in place to make sure that the doctor does not operate on the wrong part. But every once in a while, those systems break down, and that's when someone gets hurt.
Yeah, it's like anything else, but it just should be a real basic thing. I would be terrified as a doctor if I came in and saw a patient not marked, or even if they were marked, even before I start cutting. I'm going to go, okay, yeah, we've got to do this surgery. Can we just double check, take a look at the chart one more time for me? Is it the right? Or, I don't know why. But I guess when you're doing hundreds and hundreds of these, at some point you just have to trust the people around you to get it right. But before I cut, because I'm the one doing the cutting, I just think and I don't care how long you've been at it. And there's certain, I think, things that I do as a journalist here where I'll double check certain facts because it's just so important I not get it wrong. And I've been at this business for more than 20 years, and I've done thousands of stories, and I still, when something comes along, this is something I need to check. Like, for instance, let me give you just an example, just for kicks. Sometimes we put a phone number up on the screen to call if you have a tip, and it can be from different areas or what. Before I ever put that phone number on the screen, I call it myself. A lot of times they'll email it to us, say, if you have the tip, can you please call this number? I always dial it myself And they pick up and I say, I just want to make sure this is the right number. And they say, because I had heard of a story once where they gave you the misprint and it was some poor old lady's house getting called all the time after I put it on the air. That's standard for me now. I always call that number before I put it on the air. And so I don't think it's an excuse to say you have a lot of stories or you've been at it for years. If you just don't check something, I think that's just lazy.
Well, that is your safety mechanism, and it's a good one. And like I said, typically that's what's done. It's just every once in a while a corner's cut, and when it is, someone can have the wrong body part operated on.
Oh, crazy.
It's bad when it happens.
All right, listen, we're going to take phone calls for you as always this morning. If you have questions about maybe a procedure, real quickly, if we can, just before we get to some of the calls. I mean, we got the lines open, some are coming in now, but if you would, Clint, just give us just a quick thumbnail, as I like to have you do, of what constitutes a malpractice case. What elements do you have to maybe have a legitimate case?
Well, there's three basic components to any medical negligence case. The first component is there has to be what they call a departure from the standard of care. That is the rule or rules that apply to the doctor or the nurse in terms of caring for the patient. So you have to first prove that a rule's been broken. Secondly, you have to prove that the breaking that rule caused an injury that otherwise would not have occurred. If there are some situations where rules are broken, but it didn't harm the patient for one reason or another. So there has to be a connection between the breaking of the rule and the injury or the harm that the patient suffered. And finally, there have to be damages, and damages means an injury, and it needs to be a substantial injury, a permanent injury, because in this environment, it's been my experience, juries typically will not compensate patients unless there's been a severe permanent injury.
A severe permanent injury.
Correct.
So what you're saying is you've certainly had people walk through the front door of your office and bring you a case which meets the first two criteria, perhaps, but you don't take it simply because there's not enough to be recovered here.
That's right.
Okay, so you can be injured, and it could be a malpractice incident, but it doesn't mean you're going to win or get anything big in court.
I think, Nick, even the medical community recognizes there are a large number of cases of people who fall between the cracks, those who have been injured as a result of some type of medical neglect, who may have a $50,000 case or a $100,000 case, and those cases aren't brought because the lawyers who examine those cases don't believe that they can win them. Or don't believe they're cost effective, because it costs many times it costs up to $50,000 or $60,000 just to get the case to trial. So many of those people can't get justice, and that's one of the really, really sad parts of our system as it exists today.
Yeah, as we should say, you get paid most of the time on contingency.
Correct.
You have to choose a case thinking, one, obviously you're going to win, and then you get a percentage of the settlement if you win. And if you lose, you're out whatever expenses, your time, of course, which is valuable, any experts you had to bring in to evaluate, correct?
Correct.
So it's a gamble, perhaps in part on you do the best you can, but you don't always know for sure you're going to win.
It's a judgment call.
It is a judgment call. All right, let's take one phone call before we take our break, and we'll get back and get into more detail with him on this. But let's go to Troy. Hi, Troy.
How you doing?
Hey, good to hear from you. What's your question, my friend?
Well, I've been going to a certain hospital here in Nashville for 2 years. On my back and leg pain.
Yeah.
Don't want to give me no pain medicine.
Okay, so you have a lot of pain, and you go to the doctor, and for whatever reason, they're not giving you the pain medicine you want?
Yeah. And I had my MRI done.
What do they say your condition is? I mean, because as well as I do, a lot of people, I'm not saying you do, go in there and abuse pain medicine. And so they try to be careful on that. So you say you have a legitimate condition and they just won't give you pain pills?
Yeah, I mean, they won't really treat me for what my injury is.
Okay, but do you think it's a malpractice case, or are you just frustrated that you're not getting the proper treatment from your doctors? Or that's what you want to know, I guess?
I'm just frustrated.
Okay, what's odd about his case is, and the sad fact here is, if you want pain pills these days, there's plenty of unscrupulous clinics that will write them for you like that. And the police are always trying to crack down on those people that do that, who are crooks. And we're talking about doctors that write pain scripts over and over and over for people when they know darn well they're going through a 30-day supply in 10 days.
Yeah, this doesn't.
Now, I'm not saying that's the case with him, but it's hard for me to believe someone's having trouble getting pain pills, unfortunately, in today's society. But what do you think?
It does happen from time to time, but it sounds like this gentleman needs to get a second medical opinion or go get treatment somewhere else. It doesn't sound like a medical malpractice case to me.
Yeah, not a malpractice case in your point, but exactly. Find another doctor. Go someplace where you get the help you think you need. Listen, we got to take a break on that note. When we come back, more of your calls. The number 737-7587. Again, medical malpractice. That's what he specializes in. We'll give you an idea of whether or not you have a case. We also need to make sure to remind you about statute of limitations. We'll talk about that right after this.